Hello and welcome to ULI-Philadelphia. This is Emerging Trends in Real Estate 2008. In Podcast 2, we'll hear from a panel of economists discussing their outlook for the real estate industry.
Good morning, I'm Gus Faucher from Moodys.com. We're an economic consulting firm we're located in Westchester, so not too far from here. And we're going to be taking what Steve talked about in terms of the national economic trends and try to apply them to what's going on in the broad region, which is pretty much New Jersey, the eastern half of Pennsylvania, and then down into Delaware. And we're going to start with Jim Hughes, who's going to talk about what's going on in New Jersey.
Thanks, Gus. Gus gave me very firm instructions to keep my opening remarks brief. I think that was because at my last presentation, it was observed that during the first 10 minutes, 90% paid attention. During the second 10 minutes, 50% were distracted. During the third 10 minutes, 100% were engaged in sexual fantasies. So, with the discipline I haven't shown in many years, I will attempt to comply and proceed forthwith. Two admonitions before we begin. I've often been accused of being much better at forecasting the past than forecasting the future. And I've also been accused of being the Dr. Kevorkian of the New Jersey economy, probably because I've predicted fully nine of our last 5 recessions. So, you are twice forewarned. At the risk of jeopardizing my hard-earned reputation as the Garden State doomster, let me start off with some positive observations and a long-term perspective on New Jersey. Over the past quarter of a century, the state was completely reinvented from a fading manufacturing dynamo, a badly fading manufacturing dynamo, into a very powerful post-industrial, knowledge-dependent economy, now totaling more than 4.1 million jobs. And I do believe that New Jersey is one of the epicenters of the new economy, whose key core sectors are financial activities, information, and professional and business services. Over 24%, nearly 1 out of 4 of the state's jobs are in financial activities, information, and professional and business services, compared to 21% for the nation as a whole. So 24% versus 2.1% advantage New Jersey. The state not only has a rich array of economic assets, it also has one of the finest workforces in America. According to Census 2000, New Jersey ranked 5th among the 50 states in the proportion of the adult population with a bachelor's degree or higher, and it ranked 3rd among the 50 states in the proportion of the adult population with a Ph.D. degree. And this highly educated workforce remains a powerful economic magnet, and it bulwarks one of the most affluent and deep consumer markets in the country. So, given this enviable economic position, what's the problem? Basically, employment has totally and absolutely refused to grow at a rate anywhere near the pace that accompanies an expansion in New Jersey. Now, during the last 2 expansions, 1982 to 1989 and 1992 to 2000, New Jersey added 74,000 private sector jobs per year on average, an average gain of 74,000 private sector jobs per year during the last 2 expansions. However, during 2004, 2005, 2006, all expansion years, New Jersey gained on average just 24,000 private sector jobs per year. This is 1/3 of a typical expansion year, 24,000 versus 74,000, and it's a good chance we won't even hit 24,000 jobs in 2007. Moreover, some of New Jersey's northern peer states have started to pull away from us. For the first 9 months of the year, private sector employment in New Jersey grew by 0.5%, In contrast, private sector employment increased by fully 1% in both Connecticut and Massachusetts, double New Jersey's rate. So the state is no longer the economic dynamo of the Northeast, a role it so ably performed in the 80s and 90s. Moreover, growth in the number of office jobs since 2000 has been minimal. In the 1992 to 2000 expansion, New Jersey added 244,000 jobs in finance, information, and professional and business services, nearly 250,000 jobs during the expansion. In the 2000 and 2007 period, from the peak of the last business cycle to the present, the state added net only 2,500 office jobs in information, finance, and professional and business services. Bottom line, New Jersey has yet to have a breakout economic year in the new millennium or in the current expansion. Now, as an aside, I should have pointed out to you earlier that economists, like myself, are not held in very high regard in New Jersey. A brief story about that famous New Jersey resident, Albert Einstein, proves instructive here. While Albert is queuing to enter heaven, he meets three people. So what does he do? He obviously asks about their IQs. The first says 190. Wonderful, says Einstein. We can discuss my theory of relativity. The second answers 150. Good, says Einstein. I look forward to discussing the prospects for world peace. Third person mumbles 50. Einstein pauses. So what's your economic outlook for next year? Whatever, the state's overall slow economic growth masks considerable geographic variations. Between 2000 and 2006, total employment in New Jersey grew by 3% over 6 years. In contrast, employment declined by 1.1% in North Jersey between 2000 and 2006. A decline of 1.1% in the state's largest region. Employment in central New Jersey grew by 5.4%, plus 5.4%, while employment in South Jersey, the state's smallest region, grew by nearly 10%. In 2006, South Jersey accounted for only 20% of the state's total employment base, but it accounted for 62% of the state's total job growth in the 2000 to 2006 period. And that's reflected, obviously, in office vacancy rates, 11.8% in South Jersey, 19.6% in north central New Jersey. So South Jersey is the state's growth frontier. The same is true to a somewhat lesser extent for population. In 2006, South Jersey accounted for 21% of the state's population. It accounted for 30% of the state's population growth in the 2000-2006 period. Now, part of the reason for New Jersey's slow employment growth and for the better performance of South Jersey is housing affordability in the state. Good news, in 2005, New Jersey ranked number 1 among the 50 states in the District of Columbia in median household income. Bad news, in 2006, it was knocked off of its top-ranked perch and now ranks second to Maryland. Good news, there is still no statistically significant difference between New Jersey's median household income and that of Maryland, and New Jersey's income remained 33% higher than that of the nation, 33% higher, the same as 2005. So if New Jersey seceded from the United States and became a separate nation, it'd be the wealthiest country on earth, followed closely by Luxembourg. That assumes Maryland was not smart enough to secede. Bad news, New Jersey is ranked number 1 among the 50 states in the District of Columbia in housing costs. The state's housing costs stand fully 52% higher than those of the nation, 52% higher in both 2005 and 2006. And that puts New Jersey at a severe competitive disadvantage. For example, housing costs in the Charlotte, North Carolina metropolitan area, an economic competitor, are 8% below those of the nation, fully 8% lower than the nation. Again, New Jersey's are 52% higher. Again, sharp differentials between North and South Jersey. Housing costs in the census-defined northern and central New Jersey metropolitan divisions are fully 68% higher than those of the nation, 68% higher, while they are only 24% higher in the Camden metropolitan division. So southern New Jersey is far more affordable than north central New Jersey, although it is still expensive in a national context. Now, closely linked to housing costs and slow employment growth is the slowing of New Jersey's overall demographic locomotive. Between 2000 and 2006, the state's population increased by only 3.7%, 3.7% versus 6.4% nationally. So advantage U.S. Now, this is a result of a dramatic post-2002 growth deceleration. In 2002, New Jersey's annual population growth totaled 79,000 persons, 79,000. 2003, 63,000. 2004, 56,000. 2005, 33,000. 2006, 21,000. So 79, 63, 56, 33, 21. Applying all of the keen analytical ability that I've honed during my many decades at Rutgers, I think I discern a trend in the making here. Now, I'm not saying we're entering a demographic death valley, but if we extrapolate this trend, a simple straight-line extrapolation, New Jersey would start to experience annual population declines by 2008. Now, the cause of this deceleration has been what the Census Bureau calls net internal migration losses. That is, ignoring immigration from abroad, more people are moving out of New Jersey to the rest of the country than people from the rest of the country are moving into New Jersey. And the net outflow has accelerated steadily since 2002. In 2002, New Jersey had a net out-migration loss of 24,000 persons. That is, 24,000 more people moved out of New Jersey than moved into it. 2003, the outflow increased to 33,000 people. 2004, 45,000 people. 2005, 57,000 people. And 2006, 73,000 people. So 24, 33, 45, 57, 73. Again, I think I'm able to discern another trend in the making. The one positive from the current housing slump is that it may slow that out-migration in 2007. If you can't sell your house, you can't move. Nonetheless, slow demographic and economic growth will continue to characterize New Jersey in 2008, and that assumes the nation does not slip into recession. And the South should continue to have an edge over north-central New Jersey. I can't resist this. Let me finish up with a new Economist joke, hot off the press. A woman hears from her doctor that she has only a half a year to live. The woman obviously asks the doctor, "What should I do?" Doctor advises her to quickly marry a New Jersey economist. The woman asks, "Will marrying an economist cure my illness?" "No," the doctor answers, "but it will make the 6 months seem like a lifetime." Thank you very much.
Joel, would you like to discuss what you see the current economic trends in the greater region to be?
Okay, thanks, Gus. And I just saw the sign go up saying I have 1 more minute left. Actually, we were asked to do about 6 to 8 minutes, and since my wife claims I can't clear my throat in less than 15 minutes, I'm already over time, so I've got some problems. But I first want to make some comments about the national economy, because clearly, looking at the region, we have to have some ideas of what's going on there. And obviously, we think conditions started changing in August when we had the beginnings of the meltdown of the subprime market, but we really knew that was happening for a long period of time. And we're going to have to be adjusting to the changes that creates. Of course, the whole issue of adjusting to change is something that we as economists love, because if we didn't have change and the economy simply grew at a constant, solid pace all the time, we wouldn't be up here, we'd be actually working for a living. But change is really critical. We have to adjust for it. We have to deal with it. We have to deal with it in our business world. We have to deal with it in our private lives. My private life, I've dealt with it, I think, quite carefully. When I was in college in the 60s, I thought about moving to California because it was a very warm, very cool place to live. I now think about moving to California because it's a warm place to live. In the 60s, I used to listen to acid rock, and now I listen for acid reflux. It's adjusting to those kinds of changes as we get older that we have to deal with, and those are the changes that are really driving the economy at this particular point. The issue of the subprime concerns me because, as Stephen commented about, this is a repricing of risk not just in the housing market, but in all markets across the spectrum in the financial sector. We've seen it in the housing, we've seen it in commercial real estate, we've seen it in commercial paper and in commercial lending. And that's raising prices, it's raising interest rates, it's creating some uncertainty, and it's creating an awful lot of conservative behavior on the part of financial institutions. It's also creating an awful lot of losses in financial institutions. And while they might have it coming, there are some real macro implications of that. The macro implications of that are that if we take a look at the history of the financial sector, and I've been a bank economist for over 25 years now, when banks or financial institutions lose money, what they tend to do is they stop lending. I like to tell the story about, I used to be the chief economist for First Fidelity, may it rest in peace, but we were the largest bank in New Jersey in the 1990s. And in 1989, 1990, we ran into financial problems. And the first part of the 1990s, we really stopped lending. Indeed, I used to comment that our chief credit officer had, two stamps. One said no, and the other one said no way. And that's the problem we face as far as the national economy is concerned, is that we are into a period and starting a period where the financial institutions will be withholding credit, making it more difficult and making it more expensive, and that creates the distinct possibility that this slowdown that we're poised for, which I think most of us say is probably out there, could become a lot steeper and lead to a recession. Because if you turn over every single rock and look at the economy, there are as many challenges as there are opportunities, and really more so. And indeed, as Stephen commented about before, the only thing that will really keep us out of a recession is if we can maintain the job growth. And to understand job growth, we have to look to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics has been very, very fascinating lately. When they first gave us the August employment report, it said that the economy actually lost 4,000 jobs. 1 month later, when they revised it, they said the economy actually grew by 89,000 jobs. So let's see now. They got the sign wrong, and they got the magnitude wrong, but otherwise they were dead on. We're depending on them for the numbers, and it's not really clear what job growth will look like. But when I see the data coming out of the small business sector, that they're becoming much more conservative and much more uncertain about the future, and that's where most of the jobs, if not all the jobs, tend to be created in this economy, then I'm a bit worried about it. So on a national level, I have some concerns that this slowdown could become steeper, and that I think unless job growth holds up, there's a good possibility that we could go into the recession part of the forecast that Stephen talked about. Now, what does that mean as far as some of the regional economies go? Well, interestingly, typically in this region, in the Philadelphia area, into Delaware, Allentown, southern New Jersey, we used to go into recession first and come out of it last. That was the normal cycle within this economy. Well, there's been an advantage here. The advantage is that some of the excesses, if not most of the excesses that were built up, especially in the housing sector, just really didn't appear here. Yes, if you go out to the shore, they're falling apart out there. But if you look even in the suburban areas, prices went up, but they didn't go up so much that we saw a huge increase in building that's now falling apart. Even in downtown Philadelphia, we had a huge number of units that were announced, but thankfully not a lot of shovels that went into the ground. So on the supply side, we didn't see the kind of excesses that are out there. So while the housing market may be weak and creating some problems for the economy in general, it's not as bad as it had been. We have been growing essentially at a modest to moderate pace over the last 3 to 4 years, and it doesn't look like that has changed a whole lot. Yes, we're beginning to trend down a little bit as far as growth goes, but I don't see that being affected greatly. In other words, even if the national economy goes into a recession, I don't see that we necessarily have to go into a recession at this time. Growth will slow because we're not isolated, but the excesses that were out there are not there, and there are some advantages that we have as far as this is concerned. The city, the point that Stephen made about the boomers retiring. Now, for all you developers out there, we're not retiring all at once. It's a 10 to 20-year process that goes on. In 2005, I'd given a talk to the downtown developers and told them it would be a great market for the next 10, 15 years. And the next year they called me back and they asked what happened. And I said, what happened was you tried to build 10 to 15 years worth of supply in 1 year. That's not a good procedure and business plan. Thankfully, a lot of those things didn't happen. But the long-term trend, I think, is slowly coming about. And there's an interesting thing that's going on that matches this boomer movement to what I call the high-density amenity locations. In other words, where everything is located, and it doesn't take you 20 minutes to go to a Starbucks. What's happening is that along with that is this idea that the wireless technology is also coming about. And I've called wireless probably the most important revolution for the commercial real estate market since the elevator. And why is that the case? It really changes the cost structure of renovating older buildings. You take some of the buildings, for example, in downtown Philadelphia, that if you had to bring them up to Class A levels, the cost of bringing in technology would be prohibitive. But under a wireless concept, and if you think about that, not just wireless today, think about where wireless has come in the last 5 years and where it's going to go over the next 5 years because technology changes in an exponential fashion. When you think about that and you look at a building that has some really wonderful architectural advantages and nice location, but it's got trees growing out of the roof and the pigeons have taken over, and you couldn't redo them. Now basically what you have to do is kill the trees, get rid of the pigeons, clean up the droppings, put in some wiring, and plug in a router, and you're largely up to speed. Yes, there's a little bit more than that, but the renovation costs of buildings changes dramatically with that. When you look at the fact that boomers are moving into high-density amenity locations, and wireless changes the cost structure of a lot of the older buildings, it creates new advantages for older areas within the region. Not just downtown Philadelphia, but some of the older communities where there's a large number of buildings that are just simply not being renovated because of the prohibitive structure to bring them up to speed. Wireless changes that and will change the location or potential location for offices because people are moving into these places, and when you have the households moving in, and you have the opportunities, that will change the locations. That creates enormous opportunities for Philadelphia, and I suspect Mayor Nutter will talk about that in a little while. In the suburbs of Philadelphia, growth has been stable. It hasn't been spectacular. There hasn't been any large amounts of building. I think that will stay. Where I have some concerns is in Delaware. We have some vehicle sector problems and cutbacks that are affecting that state tremendously. There are still restructuring going on in the financial sector. And that's going to affect that state tremendously. So I have more concerns about Delaware now than I do about, the Philadelphia, suburbs in Pennsylvania. In Allentown, that's still benefiting from the out-migration from New York as New York becomes a huger metropolitan area. And as Stephen mentioned, the cost structure up there is incredible, and Allentown area is benefiting from that and will continue to grow from that. There's been some cycles. We saw that cycle in the middle to the end of the 1990s. I think we see that cycle pick back up as we continue the rest of this decade. So when I take a look at the economy, I see some real problems in the national economy, but I think the local economy, we're not looking at tremendous growth, but I think that it has the potential to weather it much better than we have in past cycles. The one concern, as I said about, is in the Delaware area.
Thank you very much, Joel. I'd like to reiterate something that Joel made about, he talked about the housing market, and we haven't seen the worst excesses here, and I think that's very true. Another advantage of that is that means that we haven't seen the same deterioration in credit quality that we have seen nationally. Obviously, what's going on with subprime loans, all the foreclosures that are going on out there, that's a very big concern nationally. And certainly we have seen a worsening in credit quality in the greater Philadelphia area. However, compared to what's going on nationally, it hasn't been nearly as bad. The problems are much worse in other areas along the East Coast, in Washington, D.C., in the greater New York area, which to some extent includes northern New Jersey, and then in the greater Boston area. These are areas that saw much bigger run-ups in house prices than we saw in the greater Philadelphia area. Therefore, people really had to stretch to get into a home in those areas. That wasn't as much the case here, and therefore we just have not seen that same deterioration in credit quality. So while the slowing in the housing market will be a weight on consumer spending here, it's not going to be nearly to the same extent as we see in other areas along the East Coast. Another thing that Joel brought up, he brought up Delaware and the problems that they're having. Certainly, I think Philadelphia is less exposed to national financial markets than other places along the East Coast. Yes, we have a lot of financial services firms, particularly in the Wilmington area, in northern New Jersey, where incomes are going to take a big hit from what's going on with the Wall Street firms, and then Trenton, and then also to some extent Camden has a concentration in what we call non-bank lending, and that is an area that is being hit and will continue to be hit by what's going on with the subprime mortgage markets. Philadelphia does have some exposure to national financial markets through financial services firms, but less so than we see along the East Coast. So we're relatively more protected in that respect. Obviously, our legal firms, our accounting firms in the greater Philadelphia area, those will suffer somewhat from the national slowdown that we're seeing, but I don't think the problems will be as great as they are in other metro areas along the East Coast. And then, one thing that we do have is we have a good base of industries that are less exposed to the business cycle, as Joel mentioned. So if you think about healthcare and education, which are very, very important around here, Philadelphia has very strong concentrations in those with our universities, with our teaching hospitals, with the pharmaceutical firms. Now, the pharmaceutical firms have their own problems, obviously, but that is not an industry that is generally exposed to what's going on in the national economy. So those types of non-cyclical industries will prevent Philadelphia and in the greater Philadelphia area from suffering from the big effects of the national economic slowdown that we're seeing. And then one other factor that I wanted to bring up, and this is something that Stephen talked about, he talked about, I believe, was internal distribution centers. So these are the areas that are very important for trade but are not on the coast. He mentioned Harrisburg. Allentown is another area that is also heavily exposed to internal distribution. It's on the East Coast, it's close to Philadelphia, it's close to New York, its costs are much lower, and so therefore there's a lot of distribution that goes in and out of Allentown, similar to what we see in Harrisburg. And these are areas that will probably benefit, although there is going to be some weakening in consumer spending nationally. Exports currently are very, very strong. The global economy is doing very well. The dollar is very weak. We've seen it hit record lows against the Canadian dollar, against the pound, against the euro. So that is going to support exports. So that will support these distribution centers. It will also support the ports in northern New Jersey and Philadelphia and so forth. And it'll also support manufacturing industries that are tied to international markets, and we do have a lot of those in New Jersey and in the greater Philadelphia. So domestic manufacturing, although it's certainly not going to experience big gains or anything like that, I think probably the worst of the manufacturing slowdown is over, except for the domestic auto industry that's in Delaware. But I think that the manufacturing won't be the drag on the regional economy that it has been recently, and strong export growth and the weaker dollar are going to be big advantages there. And with that's my point. We talked about housing affordability. Jim, you've mentioned that. Joel, I mean, housing affordability in the Pennsylvania and Delaware, how does that fit in? How do you think that plays for growth here?
Well, again, first of all, there's a couple of factors that are involved. One is the population issue, and the other is the housing affordability issue. We've always been a minimal growth in terms of population in this area. The goal of a lot of what we're trying to do in economic development is to retain a lot of the students that are in here. But the housing prices are relatively fair in this area, given the income. And again, I think the key to this has been that while we had some run-up in home prices, it hasn't been excessive. So, as you commented, housing is not going to be a major drag on the local economy. That doesn't mean we're not going to be seeing some declines in home prices in markets around this region. That's happening. But if you compare, some of the other areas where we're going to be looking at least another 20 to 30% declines, we should likely not see anything near that in this area.
Okay. Could I respond to that?
Sure.
This is OFEA data, Office of Federal Housing Enterprise Oversight, which was created post the SNL debacle in the early 1990s, and they process all the data for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and so they have consistently across the country millions of pieces of data, and they trace the prices of homes over time, individual homes. So it's not changing mix of units does not affect their index. And it actually understates the actual price increases because it excludes jumbo mortgages, only the mortgages that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac can buy. In the 80 to 88 housing boom or housing bubble, again, this is just New Jersey, home prices went up by 145% over 8 years. In the 98 to 2006 period, the second 8-year period, home prices went up by 135%. So it's a very, very similar experience to what we had in the 1980s. The difference is in the 80 to 88 period, the nation only grew by about 145%, but only by 45% compared to 145% in New Jersey. The 98 to 2006, it was about 88% to 135%. So the gap narrowed. But it was a significant price increase.
The other side of cost and affordability is high demand. If prices are high, people are willing and able to pay those prices. People find that New Jersey is a more desirable place to live than Charlotte if they're willing to pay higher prices for that. In that sense, are high costs in of itself really a problem?
Do you want to start? Or you want me to? Yeah, I think high costs are a very, very significant problem, and particularly as the economy slows and the bottom line of corporations are stressed, they're going to expand probably in lower cost locations than higher cost locations because labor forces are increasingly mobile. And I think the reason for the success of North Carolina, particularly the Charlotte area,
people find that New Jersey is a more desirable place to live than Charlotte if they're willing to pay higher prices for that. In that sense, our high costs
is that they found that if they do locate there, if the labor force isn't there, the labor force will go there. And it's particularly important for young family-raising households. Sure, a lot of people can afford New Jersey. It offers a very, very high quality of life. Certainly, I am extraordinarily happy there. But if you're a 30-year-old young executive with 2 children and you want a single-family home and you're earning $110,000 per year, you can't make it in New Jersey. You can't get the single-family home you want unless you have an extraordinarily long commute into Pennsylvania. And I think those types of households find those lower-cost locations much more attractive to get the housing that they desire.
I think that the low housing affordability is a major reason for, and Jim mentioned this, the out-migration that we see. It's all along the eastern seaboard, but I think, people are looking to move to areas where they can afford a home, and for many young families, that just isn't the case in the Northeast. Great, well, thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this Urban Land Institute podcast recording. If you have comments or suggestions about these podcasts, please email steve@professionalpodcasts.com. We produce these programs in the studios of Professional Podcasts in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. For the Urban Land Institute, this is Steve Lubetkin. Thanks for being with us, and take good care.